If you want to get in the groove, mask up to get down, and make sure you stay 6 feet from stardom. Today, on A Place of Our Own, if history has become nothing short of BS, then it's time to call on the armed forces, PBS. Watch as history becomes alive with a little help from Hollywood. Welcome, I'm Pete Charles Sesko, and this is the Thrift Store Rundown's Place of Our Own. A Place of Our Own was designed just for you. Kids, teens, Generation Zers, millennials, baby boomers, anyone who wants to bring Hollywood to the classroom on a budget. As you know, every interaction you have with your favorite celebrity or fellow fandom friend is a very important learning opportunity that you can apply to your everyday life. So when it comes to educating yourself about the wonderful world of pop culture, TSR is committed to helping you make the grade. In fact, we are your first and coolest teacher. Our founding fathers made history as they went along their daily business in the 1700s, one day at a time. Therefore, making future, more advanced generations suffer each class day for 45 minutes a period studying their legacy. But what if I told you that there were 2 books out there, at least 2 books I learned about, that could make the topic of American history much more interesting to bear through? This being the first of them both. Liberty, the American Revolution by historian Thomas Fleming, purchased for 25% off the price of $4.99, a Viking publication. I know it doesn't look like much on the surface of the cover, but if you see right here closely, this is the PBS logo. In fact, this is the companion book to the 6-part documentary miniseries, fairly star-studded, Liberty, the American Revolution. I'm going to turn things over to Forrest Sawyer, host of this documentary series and formerly of ABC News, to explain the history that encapsulates this entire book, or this book encapsulates, really. And I'll be back to explain more about the documentary and my review of the book itself. And maybe, just maybe, the 2 of us might be able to spark a revolution in American history teachings. Who knows? That's your call right now on the Thrift Store Rundown's Place of Our Own.
Hello, I'm Forrest Sawyer. Welcome to our series, Liberty. We live in a time of fast-breaking news, which seems very far from the 18th century world, the subject of this series. Yet if you pick up a newspaper on any given day, you'll see items very familiar to the people who launched this country. Issues like taxes, freedom of speech, and the big theme that runs through this entire series, power. The power that government has over our lives. This series covers a span of 25 extraordinary years, a period when Americans transformed themselves from subjects of a king to citizens of a separate nation. And on the way, they devised a totally new system of government. Nothing's more surprising than the beginnings of the conflict. The founding fathers, like George Washington, were wealthy patricians. The last thing they wanted was a revolution. Yet the rich and powerful came to lead this uprising, one which would ultimately turn their privileged society upside down. As in all history, at the time, nobody knew where they were going, and they certainly didn't know how everything would turn out. But without intending it, they came up with the most revolutionary idea of the modern world, the idea that without kings and noblemen, ordinary people could govern themselves. Looking back at our history, the break with England seems so inevitable. But in the 1770s, it wasn't at all obvious to the 3 million British colonists living in what is now the United States. They loved England. Even after the shooting war had begun, the vast majority of the people in America were extremely reluctant to make the final break with their mother country. Back in 1774, as Ben Franklin put it, nobody drunk or sober was even talking about war or independence. On the other side of the Atlantic, however, positions had hardened. The British had an empire around the world to control. If the unruly colonists in America got their way, the other colonies might also be encouraged to rebel. British authority must be enforced by British military might. In this, the 4th episode of Liberty, you're going to meet another amazing character, British General John Burgoyne. You may never have heard of Burgoyne, but because of events which he set in motion, you and I carry American, not British, passports. In 1777, General Burgoyne had every reason to be confident. The 13 states faced devastating odds. The colonists always had imported manufactured goods from England, so now they find themselves low on gunpowder, tents, even uniforms. At times, their soldiers must face the British Army with little more than sharpened iron spears. The states need help. Without support from a foreign power, the cause and the revolution will be lost. In this, Program 5 of Liberty, the war shifts to the southern states. I grew up in the South, surrounded by powerful reminders of the Civil War, not the American Revolution. But as we shall see, the southern states played a decisive role in the war that created this country. The War of Independence was, until Vietnam, the longest ever fought by the United States. And in 1780, when our episode begins, the conflict has become a question of who can hold out the longest. On the American side, the states are bankrupt, and there are mutinies among the ragged, ill-fed soldiers. In England, members of Parliament are getting impatient. While the war drains the treasury, the rebellion drags on. Stalemated in the north, the British now decide to focus on the south, a volatile land fraught with old feuds and rivalries. Here, the British see a chance to divide and conquer. In every period of history, there are problems that seem to attract the greatest minds of the age. In our time, they're in the fields of science and technology. In the 18th century, the question of the age was government, how to form a government that could protect liberty and endure. It's one thing to win a revolution. It's quite another to avoid a dictatorship and create a system of government that preserves the freedoms for which people fought. This was the problem facing the 13 states in 1783. To fight the war, they had joined together somewhat reluctantly into a loose federation. All real power, the power to tax, to raise armies, to enforce treaties, rested not with the Continental Congress, but with the states. There was no president of the country, no national court system, no Washington, D.C. The French, realistic as always, prepared to send 13 separate ambassadors, one to each of the states. The War of Independence is over, but the fate of the American Revolution has yet to be decided.
So now that you're caught up in the 25-year chronicle of the Revolutionary War by Forrest Sawyer, let's get you caught up on the documentary series itself. 6 one-hour episodes aired over a period of 3 nights. That's 2 episodes a night if you're doing the math. November 23rd through the 25th of 1997. This Peabody Award-winning documentary miniseries from PBS was introduced, not really hosted, by Forrest Sawyer, who you just heard from, because he only appears in the beginning of each episode. It's narrated by Edward Herman, who is part of an all-star cast who portrays the founding fathers and mothers of our time. Among them, Campbell Scott, Victor Garber, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Steve Zahn, and Peter Donaldson, among others. This book encapsulates between two hardcovers the human drama which you can feel, and feel in great depth with a lot of great clarity, thanks in large part to Thomas Fleming's compelling narrative, all gathered from historical documents and interviews with historians, and plenty of historical text from the 25-year period of the American Revolution. It really does produce quite a compelling narrative. All of this is enriched by plenty of black and white and color illustrations, which really do make up the bulk of the photography here, if not all of the photography, to further illustrate the points that this book is trying to make here. It retails for $39.95 if you order it off of PBS Home Video along with the VHS set. Further, for the series, British and American historians and authors provide plenty of historical perspective and context. The series also covers the participation of American Indians, the status of black slaves and freemen, and the strivings of American women as the events throughout this quarter of a century tumultuous period in our time progress. Really, although I'm not an American historian, I don't see any reason to fault this book on any level, on any capacity. It gets all 5 claps. Our relentless quest for life, liberty, and pursuit of knowledge is never ending. However, if you're looking for all sorts of cool knowledge that you can withstand over the course of a couple of days as you read this cover to cover, well then, history and social studies teachers, you can pretty much call this pursuit terminated. You just found it. This class is now dismissed, but remember, if you missed any lessons in this series, be sure to check out my back to school playlist, Too Cool for School, which you can find through a link in the description. And be sure to subscribe and click the bell. And remember, when it comes to bringing Hollywood to the classroom on a budget, TSR is committed to helping you make the grade. That's why we are your first and coolest teacher. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on the flip side on A Place of Our Own.